The engine of the gleaming golden Ferrari purred into silence as Carolina Williams stepped out onto the pristine white marble driveway, her presence commanding and regal like a queen returning to reclaim her crown. Trailing behind her were 5 identical 6-year-olds, their matching blue dresses swaying in unison, their piercing eyes locked onto the man who had once dismissed their mother as too old and barren before abandoning her 6 years ago. Gustavo's wedding guests gasped audibly as the truth dawned on them. Quintuplets? The groom stood frozen, staring at the children he never knew existed, while moments away from marrying the sister who had stolen him away. But when Carolina opened her mouth to speak, the story she unveiled about her transformation from destitute and desperate to billionaire empire builder would shatter more than just this ill-fated wedding day. It would expose one of the most scandalous betrayals ever to rock Hampton's elite society. If you're enjoying this tale, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. Your support fuels our mission to bring you more gripping stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Now, let's continue. The morning sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the manicured grounds of Topping Rose House as Carolina Lim stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her emerald silk dress. Her reflection revealed a woman utterly transformed. At 38, she exuded an unshakable confidence that seemed to radiate from within. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, showcasing diamond earrings worth more than most people's homes. "Mommy, are we really going to see Daddy today?" asked Destiny, one of her 5 identical daughters, bouncing excitedly on the king-sized bed behind her. Carolina turned to face her quintuplets. Destiny, Poppy, Adilyn, Harlow, and Vad. All 6 years old, all bearing their father's distinctive hazel eyes and stubborn chin. They wore matching royal blue dresses with white ribbons, their hair braided identically, resembling a small but formidable army of determination. "Yes, sweetheart," Carolina replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "Today, you'll finally meet your father. But remember what we practiced," chimed Poppy, the outspoken leader of the group. "We stay close to you," added Adilyn, ever the rule follower. "And we hold hands when we walk," finished Harlow and Vad together, the twins who often seemed to share a single mind. Carolina knelt down, pulling all 5 into her arms. "That's right. Today might feel overwhelming, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" 5 little heads nodded in unison, and Carolina felt her heart swell with pride and protectiveness. These beautiful children had never known their father, had never needed him, because she had been enough for all of them. But today would change everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ford Benson. "Asterisk, the car is ready." "Are you sure about this?" Asterisk, she typed back. 6 years of silence ends today. Ford had been her business partner for 4 years now. The brilliant architect who'd helped design her tech empire from the ground up. Over time, he'd become something more. A steady presence who loved her daughters as if they were his own, who'd never once made her feel inadequate or unwanted. "Miss Carolina," came her assistant's voice from downstairs. "The Ferrari is here." Carolina smiled. The golden Ferrari F40 LM, one of only 19 ever made, valued at $100 million, had been her first major purchase after her company went public. Not because she needed it, but because she could afford it. Because the woman Gustavo Ramos had called too old and infertile had built an empire that dwarfed his inherited millions. Asterisk, you're 32, Carolina. Face the facts. You're getting old. And after 3 years of trying, it's obvious you can't give me children. I need a woman who can actually fulfill her basic biological function. Asterisk, Gustavo's words had cut through their penthouse like shattered glass 6 years earlier. Carolina had stood frozen in their kitchen, the romantic dinner she'd prepared growing cold on the table, a positive pregnancy test hidden in her purse, the surprise she'd planned to share with him that very evening. Asterisk, I'm in love with Miranda. She's everything you're not. Young, fertile, exciting. She makes me feel alive again. Asterisk, Miranda, her 24-year-old sister, with platinum blonde hair and curves that had never carried a child. The same sister who'd always resented Carolina's success, who'd smiled sweetly while plotting behind her back. Pack your things, Gustavo had continued, refusing to even look at her. I want you out by morning. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Carolina had left that night with one suitcase and the pregnancy test. Too shocked to fight, too heartbroken to reveal the truth growing inside her. Let him marry Miranda. Let him live with his choice. She would raise their children alone. Present day, 20 meters away, Gustavo Ramos adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the 5th time, staring at his reflection in the groom's sweet mirror. At 45, he'd maintained his athletic build through personal trainers and expensive treatments. His salt and pepper hair gave him what Miranda called distinguished appeal. "Stop fidgeting," Miranda snapped from across the room, where 3 stylists worked on her elaborate updo. "You look fine." Fine. Not handsome, not excited, not in love, just fine. And therein lay the problem. For months, Gustavo had felt anything but fine. The initial passion he'd felt for Miranda had faded into monotony. Their conversations revolved around social events and shopping rather than dreams and hopes. She'd given him everything he thought he wanted: youth, beauty, fertility, but something still felt hollow. "Your mother called again," Miranda continued, her irritation palpable. "She's still asking about Carolina. When are you going to tell that old woman to mind her own business?" Gustavo's jaw tightened. His mother, Mila Stanton, had never forgiven him for leaving Carolina. For 6 years, she'd made her disappointment crystal clear, refusing to attend today's wedding until the very last minute. "Miranda, please. Not today. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. I'm sick of hearing about your ex-wife. She disappeared, Gustavo. She obviously moved on, so why can't you?" But that was just it. Carolina hadn't simply moved on. She'd vanished completely. No forwarding address, no social media presence, no trace of the woman who'd once been his everything before he'd convinced himself she wasn't enough. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Ramos, the wedding coordinator, is here. The guests are arriving. We'll be ready to begin in 30 minutes. 30 minutes until he married Miranda. 30 minutes until he officially closed the chapter on his past." So why did his chest feel tight with something that felt suspiciously like regret? "Did you remember to invite the Hendersons?" Miranda asked, applying another coat of lipstick. "Yes. And the Kellys from the country club." "Good. I want everyone to see what a real wedding looks like. Not like that sad little ceremony you had with Carolina at City Hall." Gustavo winced. His wedding to Carolina had been small by choice. They'd wanted intimacy over spectacle, meaning over show. She'd worn a simple white dress and carried wildflowers, looking more beautiful than any bride he'd ever seen. She'd promised to love him through everything, to build a life together that mattered. And he'd thrown it all away for a woman who saw marriage as a social media opportunity. "The photographer wants some pictures before the ceremony," Miranda said, standing and smoothing her extravagant gown. The dress cost more than most people's cars, all crystals, silk, and dramatic trains. It was everything Carolina's simple dress hadn't been. "In a minute," Gustavo replied, suddenly needing air. "Gustavo," I said now, "do you want to keep our guests waiting?" Our guests. Most of them were Miranda's friends from her modeling days. People who knew him only as her older, wealthy fiancé. The guest list read like a social climber's dream. All the right names, all the right connections, and all the wrong reasons for celebrating. As he followed Miranda out of the suite, Gustavo couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Again. The wedding ceremony began 20 minutes later under a canopy of white roses and crystal chandeliers hanging from ancient oak trees. 300 guests filled ivory chairs arranged in perfect rows across the manicured lawn, their attention focused on the altar where Gustavo stood beside the officiant, waiting for his bride. Miranda's entrance was everything she'd dreamed of. A string quartet played Pachelbel's Canon in D as she glided down the rose-petal-strewn aisle in her $50,000 gown, her train flowing behind her like liquid silk. Camera flashes captured every angle as society photographers documented what Miranda had declared would be the wedding of the century. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, his voice carrying across the garden, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Gustavo Ramos and Miranda Mathis in holy matrimony." Gustavo forced a smile, trying to focus on Miranda's face beneath her cathedral-length veil. She looked radiant, exactly as a bride should look. So why did he feel like he was attending a funeral instead of his own wedding? "Marriage is a sacred bond," the officiant continued, "built on trust, commitment, and unconditional love that endures through all of life's challenges." Trust. The word hit Gustavo like a physical blow. He'd trusted Carolina completely, and she'd trusted him, until he'd shattered that trust with his cruelty and selfishness. If anyone has a reason why this couple should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional words hung in the air like a challenge. Gustavo held his breath, half praying that someone, anyone, would step forward to object and give him an excuse to halt the charade. But the garden remained eerily still, save for the soft rustle of leaves dancing in the afternoon breeze. Then came a sound, a distant rumble, low at first but swelling with each passing second like an approaching storm. Heads swiveled toward the estate's main driveway as the noise grew unmistakable. The guttural roar of a high-performance engine barreling closer with unapologetic speed. "What is that?" whispered Mrs. Henderson, one of Miranda's society friends, her voice tinged with both awe and confusion. The thunderous growl rounded the final curve of the private road, and through the line of trees emerged something that left guests slack-jawed, an impossible apparition bathed in sunlight. A golden Ferrari, its metallic skin gleaming like molten fire under the late-day sun. "Oh my God!" someone gasped from the crowd. The car didn't slow down. Instead, it accelerated, hurtling straight toward the wedding area with the audacity of someone who owned the place. The engine's deafening roar drowned out the string quartet, forcing them to stop mid-melody as every single head turned to witness this unprecedented intrusion. "Security!" Miranda hissed beneath her veil, panic creeping into her tone. But even the guards seemed paralyzed by curiosity, their hands frozen at their sides. The Ferrari screeched to a dramatic halt just 20 feet from the altar, its engine ticking softly, as if catching its breath after the performance. For a moment, absolute silence enveloped the garden. 300 wedding guests collectively held their breath, waiting to see who would emerge from what was arguably the most expensive car most of them had ever laid eyes on. The driver's door opened with surgical precision, and out stepped a woman whose presence commanded attention like no other. She wore an emerald silk dress that clung to her curves like a second skin, her dark hair swept up to reveal diamond earrings that caught the light like stars winking down from the heavens. At 38, she radiated a beauty untethered from youth. It was born of resilience, earned through survival. Carolina Williams stood beside the golden Ferrari, surveying the scene before her like a queen reclaiming her throne. And she wasn't alone. One by one, 5 identical 6-year-old girls spilled out of the passenger side, their royal blue dresses stark against the gleaming gold of the vehicle. They moved with synchronized precision, each taking their place beside their mother in a perfect line. Destiny, Poppy, Adilyn, Harlow, and Vad. 5 little faces bearing Gustavo's hazel eyes and stubborn chin, staring at the crowd with fearless curiosity, the kind only children untouched by self-doubt possess. "Hello, Gustavo," Carolina said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the stunned garden. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. When Carolina Williams spoke, people listened. Gustavo's face drained of color. His mouth flapped open and shut like a fish gasping for air, no words escaping. His gaze darted frantically between Carolina and the 5 children standing beside her, biology and arithmetic colliding violently in his mind as he struggled to process the surreal tableau before him. "What? Who?" he stammered, breaking the spell of silence that had gripped the gathering. "These are your daughters," Carolina replied simply, placing protective hands on Poppy and Destiny's shoulders. "Destiny, Poppy, Adilyn, Harlow, and Vad. They're 6 years old today. Funny how that works out, don't you think?" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the implications sank in. 6 years old. Born 9 months after Gustavo had cast Carolina aside, accusing her of being too old and infertile. "That's impossible." Miranda shrieked, her carefully applied makeup beginning to streak as panic took hold. "You said she couldn't have children. You said she was barren." "I said a lot of things," Gustavo murmured, his voice barely audible. "I was wrong about everything." The wedding photographer, trained to capture pivotal moments, instinctively raised his camera. The flash went off, immortalizing the exact instant when Gustavo's world imploded and reformed itself around 5 little girls he'd never known existed. "Mommy," Adilyn whispered, tugging gently on Carolina's dress. "Is that really our daddy?" Carolina knelt to her daughter's level, her voice gentle yet strong enough to carry across the hushed garden. "Yes, sweetheart. That's your father." "Why does he look scared?" asked Harlow, tilting her head with innocent curiosity. "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," Carolina explained, rising gracefully to meet Gustavo's gaze. "And sometimes those mistakes have consequences they never expected." The officiant, a man who had presided over hundreds of weddings but never witnessed anything remotely like this, cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until—" "No." Miranda's voice hit a pitch so shrill it sent several birds fleeing from nearby trees. "This is my wedding day. I won't let this woman ruin it with her lies and manipulation. She turned to Gustavo, her face contorted with rage and desperation. Tell her to leave, Gustavo. Call security. This is harassment. But Gustavo wasn't looking at Miranda anymore. His entire focus had shifted to the 5 little girls standing beside Carolina like sentinels. Each bore a perfect blend of his and Carolina's features, living proof of the love he'd discarded and the children he'd unknowingly helped create. They have my eyes, he whispered, wonder seeping into his voice. And your stubborn streak, Carolina added with a faint smile. Especially Poppy. She refuses to eat vegetables and argues with her tutors about mathematical principles she doesn't understand yet. Tutors, Gustavo blurted, his business instincts kicking in despite the emotional maelstrom swirling within him. I can afford a lot of things now, Carolina interjected smoothly, gesturing to the Ferrari behind her. Including this car. It's worth exactly $100 million. I bought it because I could, not because I needed to prove anything to anyone. The figure landed like a bombshell among the guests. $100 million for a single car? It signaled wealth dwarfing most of their combined fortunes. This wasn't just Carolina returning. It was Carolina arriving as a force more powerful than anyone could have imagined. How? Gustavo asked, genuine astonishment overtaking his shock. Hard work, brilliant partners, and the motivation that comes from raising 5 children alone while building an empire, Carolina replied matter-of-factly. There was no bitterness in her tone, only truth. Turns out the woman you called too old and infertile was just getting started. Mila Stanton, Gustavo's mother, rose from her seat in the front row. At 72, she moved with purpose toward the group of strangers who were somehow also her granddaughters. Carolina, my dear, Mila said, tears streaming down her face. These beautiful girls, they're really your granddaughters, Carolina confirmed, her voice softening as she addressed the only member of Gustavo's family who had truly loved her. Girls, this is your grandmother, Mila. She's been waiting to meet you for a very long time. 5 little voices chimed in unison, polite and poised despite the chaos surrounding them. Hello, Grandmother Mila. Mila knelt despite her age, gathering as many of the girls as she could reach into her arms. My beautiful granddaughters, I've missed so much time with you. We can fix that, Carolina said gently. If you want to be part of their lives, you're welcome. The offer hung in the air, a gift wrapped in forgiveness and laced with challenge. 6 years of absence forgiven, freely given, without strings attached. Miranda, realizing she'd lost control of the narrative entirely, made one last desperate bid to salvage her day. This is ridiculous. Even if those children are his, which I doubt, that doesn't change anything. Gustavo chose me. We're getting married today. She spun to face the crowd, her voice reaching a fever pitch. Don't let this attention-seeking woman ruin our perfect day with her convenient timing and manufactured drama. But the wedding guests weren't looking at Miranda anymore. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on the 5 little girls who had flipped their understanding of family, loyalty, and consequence completely upside down. The golden Ferrari gleamed behind them, a symbol of transformation so profound it defied belief. The woman they remembered as Gustavo's quiet, devoted wife had returned as someone new, and yet, somehow, exactly who she'd always been destined to become. The silence stretched for precisely 17 seconds before chaos erupted. This is a setup, Miranda screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at Carolina. You planned this. You've been watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy my happiness. Her once magnificent wedding gown now seemed garish and desperate compared to the simple elegance of the quintuplet's royal blue dresses. The contrast was glaring, undeniable. Security. Miranda shrieked again, but the hired guards remained immobile, unsure how to handle a situation involving children and what appeared to be a legitimate family emergency. Meanwhile, wedding guests began pulling out their phones. Some recording video, others frantically texting updates to friends who hadn't been invited. The society photographers, initially hired to document Miranda's perfect day, now focused exclusively on Carolina and the quintuplets. Put those cameras away, Miranda demanded, her voice cracking with hysteria. This is a private event. But it was too late. The images were already spreading across social media platforms. #RamosWedding began trending within minutes, though not for the reasons Miranda had hoped. Gustavo stood motionless at the altar, his mind racing as he stared at his daughters. The children stood serenely amidst the whirlwind of adult turmoil, their hands clasped together in a protective chain, a lesson Carolina had drilled into them. "These aren't my children," Gustavo blurted suddenly, his voice slicing through the garden despite his attempt at quiet denial. "The timing doesn't add up, doesn't it?" Carolina raised an eyebrow, her tone steady even as she absorbed the sting of his words. "Or wouldn't they exist with a man who was already planning to walk away?" "That's not true," Gustavo protested, but his voice wavered, lacking conviction. "Really?" Carolina reached into her purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope stuffed with documents. She held them aloft like evidence in a courtroom drama. "Would you like to see the DNA test results I had done when they were born? Or perhaps the medical records showing I conceived exactly 2 weeks before you threw me out?" She lifted a single sheet of paper for the crowd to see, official letterhead and scientific data glaring back at them. 99.9% probability of paternity. "These are your children, Gustavo, whether you choose to accept responsibility or not." Dr. Francis Gordon, Gustavo's longtime physician and one of the wedding guests, stepped forward. "Gustavo, if you'd like independent verification, I can arrange that. But those children..." He studied the quintuplets carefully, his brow furrowing. "The resemblance is undeniable. They have your facial structure, your eye color, even your posture. This is insane." Miranda shrieked, her makeup now smeared into black streaks running down her face like war paint gone wrong. "Even if he did father some illegitimate brats with this woman, it doesn't matter. We're legally married." "Actually," the officiant interjected nervously, "the ceremony wasn't completed. I hadn't pronounced you husband and wife when all this happened." Miranda spun on him, fury blazing in her eyes. "Then finish it right now. Ignore this circus and marry us." But Gustavo wasn't listening to her anymore. His gaze was locked on his daughters, studying them with the intensity of a man trying to decipher the most complex puzzle of his life. Each girl bore distinct traits despite their identical appearances. Destiny carried his serious expression. Poppy mirrored his argumentative stance. Adilon shared his meticulous attention to detail. Harlow and Vad tilted their heads just as he did when deep in thought. "How?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "How what?" Carolina asked coolly, though she knew precisely what he meant. "How did you manage 5 babies alone? Quintuplets are incredibly high risk. The pregnancy alone could have killed you, and you had no support, no help." For the first time since her arrival, Carolina's composure faltered. A shadow crossed her face as memories surfaced, terrifying months etched into her soul. "I nearly died," she admitted softly. "Spent 4 months on bed rest in a charity hospital because I had no insurance after you canceled my coverage. The girls were born at 28 weeks. They spent 3 months in the NICU while I lived in my car in the hospital parking lot." The crowd fell silent again, absorbing the weight of her words. "You lived in your car?" Mila Stanton gasped, her voice trembling. "For 6 months," Carolina confirmed. "Until I met Ira Goodman." "Who's Ira Goodman?" Gustavo demanded, jealousy creeping into his tone. "My mentor, my business partner. The man who taught me that being abandoned doesn't mean being defeated." Carolina's strength returned as she spoke. "He's also the grandfather my daughters chose for themselves when their biological grandfather wasn't there." Mila flinched at the subtle rebuke, but said nothing. She'd known something was wrong when Carolina vanished, but she'd respected her son's decision instead of trusting her instincts. "Where is he now?" Gustavo asked sharply. "Waiting in the car," Carolina replied. "He wanted to give you the chance to meet your daughters without interference. But if you continue denying their existence, he'll be happy to escort us away from this spectacle." She gestured toward the trampled rose petals, the scattered wedding setup, and the string quartet packing up in bewildered silence. "I'm not denying anything," Gustavo exploded, his carefully maintained facade finally cracking. "I'm trying to understand how my entire life got turned upside down by information I should have known 6 years ago." "You should have known," Carolina agreed, her voice cutting like steel. "But you threw me out before I could tell you. You decided I was worthless and barren without giving me a chance to prove otherwise. You were 39 years old, Gustavo. That's not young. That's old enough to know better." Miranda, realizing she'd lost control of the situation entirely, made one last desperate attempt to salvage her crumbling world. "Even if those children are his, which I still doubt, they're illegitimate. I'm his wife. I have legal rights." "Actually," came a new voice from behind the crowd, "you're not his wife yet." Everyone turned to see a distinguished black man in his 70s approaching the group. Ira Goodman walked with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to authority. His silver hair and tailored suit radiated wisdom and wealth. Behind him strode a younger man in his 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Ira," Carolina greeted warmly, her first genuine smile since arriving. "Carolina, my dear, and my beautiful granddaughters." Ira's face lit up as the quintuplets broke ranks and ran to him. "How are my brilliant girls? How's Grandpa Ira doing today?" They chorused their affection, hugging him tightly. The sight sent another ripple of shock through the crowd. 5 children showering such unconditional love on a man who wasn't their biological grandfather. These children had family. They had love. They had support. They never needed Gustavo at all. "And this is Ford Benson," Carolina continued, gesturing to the younger man. "My business partner, and well, someone very special to all of us." Ford's role became clear as the children gravitated toward him too, calling him Uncle Ford, with the same warmth they'd shown Ira. Here was a man who'd been present for birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories. All the moments Gustavo had missed. "Uncle Ford, did you see Daddy's face when we got out of the car?" Poppy asked with 6-year-old directness. "I did, sweetheart. He looked very surprised," Ford replied gently, though his eyes hardened as they studied Gustavo. "Surprised?" Gustavo repeated incredulously. "I just discovered I have 5 children I never knew existed. Surprise doesn't begin to cover it." "Lower your voice," Ford said quietly but firmly. "You're scaring the children. Don't tell me how to talk to my own daughters." "Your daughters?" Ford stepped closer, his protective instincts fully engaged. "These children have never heard your voice before today. I've been the one reading them bedtime stories, teaching them to ride bikes, holding them when they cry. What exactly makes them yours besides DNA?" The question hung heavy in the air, a challenge impossible to ignore. Biology versus presence. Genetics versus love. Fatherhood versus being a father. "They're mine because they're mine," Gustavo stammered weakly. "That's not how parenthood works," Carolina interrupted. "Parenthood is earned through presence, sacrifice, and unconditional love. It's not a right you claim, it's a privilege you earn every single day." Miranda, forgotten in the unfolding family drama, finally snapped completely. "This is my wedding. My day, my moment. I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for." She lunged toward Carolina, manicured nails extended like claws. But Ford intercepted her effortlessly, catching her wrists and holding her firmly but gently. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. There are children present. I don't care about her bastard children. This is my wedding, mine." The ugly words struck the quintuplets like physical blows. Destiny, the most sensitive of the 5, began to tear up. Adilyn instinctively moved to comfort her sister. Poppy's jaw set in an expression eerily similar to her father's when angry. "Aunt Miranda said a bad word," Harlow observed solemnly. "Several bad words," Bat added. Carolina knelt down, gathering her daughters close. "Girls, remember what we discussed. Some people say hurtful things when they're scared or angry. It doesn't make the words true. But why is she angry at us?" Destiny asked, her voice small and trembling. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. You're perfect exactly as you are." Gustavo watched this exchange with growing recognition. Carolina was raising their children with grace, wisdom, and unconditional love. She was teaching them strength and kindness in equal measure. She was being the mother he'd never allowed her the chance to be when they were married. And he'd thrown it all away for a woman who had just called his children bastards. "Nobody leaves this property until we sort this out legally," announced Detective Bodie Harden as he approached the chaotic scene, his badge gleaming against his navy blue jacket. Behind him walked 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a sharp gray suit carrying a briefcase. The East Hampton police had arrived within 20 minutes of the first 911 call, though exactly who had made that call remained unclear. Some guests claimed Miranda had called for help. Others insisted it was concerned family members worried about the children's welfare. "Detective, this is a private event," Gustavo protested, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "We don't need police intervention, sir," he added weakly. Detective Harden responded with practiced professionalism. "We received multiple reports of a domestic disturbance involving minor children. Until we can verify the welfare and custody status of these children, everyone involved will need to remain available for questioning." The woman in the gray suit stepped forward. "I'm Capri Juarez from Suffolk County Child Protective Services. I need to speak with the children and confirm their living situation. Carolina's protective instincts ignited instantly. My daughters are not in any danger. They're well cared for, healthy, and loved. Ma'am, I'm sure they are, Ms. Juarez said gently. But protocol requires verification when children are present during a domestic dispute. This is routine, not accusatory. There's no domestic dispute, Carolina replied firmly. These are my children. I brought them here to meet their father. That's not a crime. But causing a public spectacle? That is. Miranda interjected shrilly, mascara still streaking her cheeks like war paint. She deliberately sabotaged my wedding. I want her arrested for harassment and trespassing. Detective Harden glanced around at the 300 bewildered wedding guests, the abandoned altar, and the gleaming golden Ferrari parked incongruously among luxury sedans and SUVs. Ma'am, from what I see, this appears to be a family matter that got complicated. Nobody's getting arrested unless someone commits an actual crime. She did commit a crime. She ruined my wedding. Interrupting a wedding isn't illegal, the detective replied patiently. Especially if she has legitimate family business with the groom. Family business? Miranda screeched, her voice reaching a new octave. She's his ex-wife. They're divorced. Actually, came another voice from the crowd. Everyone turned to see Waken Sherman, Gustavo's longtime attorney, making his way through the gathering. His face was grim as he approached the group. What do you mean actually? Gustavo demanded. The divorce was never finalized, Waken explained reluctantly. You filed the papers, but Carolina never signed them. Without both signatures, the marriage remains legally valid. The implications struck like a thunderclap. Miranda's face went white, then red, then purple with rage. That's impossible. We've been planning this wedding for 2 years. You said the divorce was complete. I said the papers were filed, Waken corrected carefully. I assumed Carolina would sign them, but she disappeared before the process could be completed. So what does that mean? Detective Harden asked, pulling out a notepad. It means Gustavo Ramos is still legally married to Carolina Williams, Waken answered. Any ceremony performed today would be invalid due to existing matrimonial bonds. Miranda let out a sound somewhere between a scream and a sob. This can't be happening. This can't be real. It's very real, Carolina said quietly. I never signed those papers because I was too busy giving birth to quintuplets and trying to survive. Divorce paperwork seemed less important than keeping 5 premature babies alive. Ms. Juarez moved closer to the quintuplets, who remained clustered protectively around Carolina, Ira, and Ford. Girls, can you tell me your names? I'm Destiny, said the most serious of the 5. I'm Poppy, announced the outspoken one. Dylan, added the meticulous one. I'm Harlow, said one of the twins. And I'm Vad, finished the other twin. And who takes care of you? Ms. Juarez asked. Mommy does, they chorused in unison. What about Uncle Ford and Grandpa Ira? She probed gently. They help Mommy, Destiny explained. Uncle Ford reads us stories, and Grandpa Ira teaches us about numbers and science. Do you go to school? We have tutors, Dylan said proudly. Mommy says we're too advanced for regular kindergarten. Ms. Juarez made notes on her tablet. The children were clearly well-educated, well-mannered, and emotionally secure. Their clothes were expensive yet practical, their health appeared excellent, and there were no signs of neglect or abuse. Ma'am, she said to Carolina, I'll need to see documentation of their medical care, education, and living arrangements. Of course. Carolina reached into her purse and produced a thick folder. Medical records, educational assessments, psychological evaluations, and photos of our home in Connecticut. Everything is in order. As Ms. Juarez reviewed the documents, Detective Harden turned his attention to the adults. Given the circumstances, I'm going to need statements from everyone involved. That includes you, Mr. Ramos, Mrs. Lim, Miss Mathis, and anyone else directly tied to this situation. How long will that take? Gustavo asked. As long as it takes to ensure these children's welfare and determine if any laws were broken, the detective replied. I suggest everyone find somewhere comfortable to wait. The wedding coordinator, who had been hovering nervously throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. The bridal suite and groom's suite are available, and we have several private dining rooms if people need space to talk. Good, Detective Harden nodded. Let's use the main building. Everyone stays on the property until we're finished. As the crowd began to disperse, many guests simply leaving despite the detective's request. The core group found themselves trapped together by circumstance and legal necessity. Carolina led her daughters toward the main building, followed closely by Ira and Ford. Gustavo found himself walking beside them, stealing glances at the children who shared his DNA but remained strangers to him. "Mommy," Vad whispered loudly, "why is that man staring at us?" "Because he's your father, sweetheart. He's just trying to get to know you. Can we get to know him too?" Harlow asked with innocent curiosity. Carolina looked at Gustavo, a silent question in her eyes. Despite everything that had happened between them, she wouldn't deny her children the chance to know their father if they wanted to. "Would you like that?" Gustavo asked softly, kneeling down to their eye level for the first time. 5 pairs of hazel eyes studied him with the unfiltered honesty only children possess. "You're really tall," Poppy observed. "You look sad," Destiny added with concern. "Are you sad because you missed our birthday party last week?" Adilyn asked. Gustavo's heart clenched. "You had a birthday party? We turned 6. Harlow explained patiently. "Mommy made us a castle cake with 5 towers, 1 tower for each of us," Vad finished. I didn't know," Gustavo admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "That's okay," Destiny said kindly. "You can come to our next birthday if you want. We won't be 7 for a whole year, though." The simple offer of forgiveness from a 6-year-old nearly shattered Gustavo's composure completely. Meanwhile, Miranda had been escorted to a separate room, where she sat surrounded by her bridesmaids, all frantically calling their respective social media managers to control the narrative of what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about wedding disaster in Hampton's history. "We can salvage this," her maid of honor, Dallas Bailey, insisted. "We'll say it was all planned, a surprise family reunion. Very emotional and touching." "With what story?" Miranda snapped. "That my husband-to-be already has a wife and 5 secret children? That he abandoned them 6 years ago? That sounds romantic to you." "We'll think of something," Dallas replied weakly. But even she knew this was beyond salvage. Photos and videos were already circulating online. Hashtags were trending, and the narrative being shared wasn't about Miranda's dream wedding. It was about Carolina's incredible transformation and the shocking family reunion. Back in the main dining room, Carolina had settled her daughters at a large table with coloring books and juice boxes that the accommodating staff had quickly provided. Ira and Ford flanked the group protectively, while Gustavo sat across the table, still trying to process the reality of his children. "They're so calm," he marveled, watching them color peacefully despite the chaos of the afternoon. "Children adapt when they feel secure," Ford explained. "Carolina's given them that security from day one." "Tell me about them," Gustavo said suddenly. "Tell me everything, their personalities, their interests, what they're good at, what they struggle with. I want to know." Carolina looked surprised by the genuine request, but began to share. "Destiny is our little philosopher. She asks the deepest questions about life, fairness, and why things happen the way they do. She's also incredibly empathetic. Poppy is our debater," she continued with a smile. "She'll argue with anyone about anything, but she's also fiercely loyal to her sisters. She's the one who speaks up when any of them are upset. Adilyn follows rules to the letter, but she's also the most creative. She writes stories and draws pictures for everyone. She remembers every detail of everything we do together. Harlow and Vad are technically fraternal twins, but they might as well share a brain. They finish each other's sentences, wake up at the same time, and have identical preferences for everything. They're also our little comedians." As Carolina spoke, Gustavo watched his daughters with growing amazement. These weren't abstract concepts anymore. These were 5 individual little people with personalities, preferences, and potential he'd never had the chance to nurture. "What do they know about me?" he asked quietly. "The truth," Carolina replied simply. "That their father wasn't ready to be a parent when they were born, but that someday he might want to meet them. And they're okay with that. Children are remarkably forgiving when they feel loved and secure. They've never lacked for father figures," Carolina said, her gaze flickering meaningfully toward Ira and Ford. "But they've always been curious about their biological father." Ms. Juarez approached the table, her assessment complete. "Mrs. Lim, your documentation is impeccable. The children are thriving under your care. I see no reason for any intervention from our department." Relief washed over Carolina's face. "Thank you. However," Ms. Juarez continued, "given that Mr. Ramos is the biological father and there's no custody agreement in place, I recommend working with family court to establish formal arrangements. It protects everyone involved." "Of course," Carolina agreed without hesitation. Detective Harden joined them, his notebook tucked under his arm. I've spoken with witnesses and reviewed the situation. No laws were broken today. Mrs. Lim had every right to bring her children to meet their father, regardless of the timing. Miss Mathis has no legal standing to file charges. So we're free to go? Carolina asked. You're free to go, Detective Harden confirmed. But given the complexity of this situation, I'd strongly recommend all parties work with legal counsel to sort out custody and marital status issues before someone makes a decision they'll regret. As if summoned by his words, Waken Sherman appeared, clutching more legal documents. Gustavo, we need to discuss your options, the marriage situation, potential custody arrangements, and how this impacts your assets. But Gustavo wasn't thinking about assets or legal complications anymore. His attention was fixed on Destiny helping Vad color inside the lines, Poppy showing Harlow how to smooth her crayon strokes, and Adilyn quietly sketching what looked like an intricate drawing of the golden Ferrari. For the first time in 6 years, he was focused on what truly mattered. The late afternoon sun streamed through tall windows as Carolina sat across from Gustavo in the intimate dining room. Their daughters played quietly nearby, supervised by Ford. Detective Harden had finished his interviews, Ms. Juarez had filed her report, and the remaining wedding guests had finally been allowed to leave. Only the core family remained, bound together by legal necessity and emotional gravity. I need to understand, Gustavo said quietly, his voice heavy with 6 years of unanswered questions. How did you survive? 5 babies, no money, no support. How did you build an empire from nothing? Carolina studied his face, searching for genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. What she saw surprised her, authentic regret and a desperate need to comprehend the magnitude of what he'd lost. It started in a gas station bathroom, she began, her voice steady despite the painful memories. February 20th, 2018, 6 days after you threw me out. I was living in my Honda Civic, parked behind a 24-hour diner in Queens, when the morning sickness hit so hard I could barely drive. She paused, watching her daughters play peacefully. Their existence still felt like a miracle she marveled at daily. I took the pregnancy test in that bathroom because I couldn't afford to see a doctor. When I saw the positive result, I sat on that dirty floor and cried for 2 hours. Not because I didn't want children, but because I had no idea how I was going to keep them alive. Gustavo winced. The image of Carolina alone and scared cut through him like a blade. Where did you go? He asked. Everywhere and nowhere. I tried staying at women's shelters, but the waiting lists were months long. I slept in my car in hospital parking lots because they felt safer than the streets. I ate 1 meal a day and told myself the baby would be fine as long as I took the prenatal vitamins I bought with spare change. Ira Goodman, who had been listening silently from across the room, approached the table. May I tell him the rest, my dear? Some memories are too painful for you to relive again. Carolina nodded gratefully, reaching for Ira's weathered hand. I found Carolina on March 15th, 2018, Ira continued, settling into a chair beside them. She had collapsed outside the public library in Stamford, Connecticut, dehydrated and malnourished at 3 months pregnant. You were homeless for a month? Gustavo's voice cracked with horror. 23 days, Carolina corrected quietly. But who's counting? Ira's expression hardened as he turned to Gustavo. When I found her, she weighed 98 pounds and hadn't eaten in 2 days. She was trying to use the library's computers to apply for jobs, but every application required a permanent address she didn't have. Why didn't you call someone? Gustavo asked. Family, friends, anyone? Who would I call? Carolina laughed bitterly. My parents died when I was 22. My only sister had stolen my husband. My friends were really your friends, and they'd all chosen sides when you announced I was being replaced. The simple statement hit Gustavo like a physical blow. He'd never considered that divorcing Carolina meant she'd lose their entire social circle along with him. So, what happened? He asked Ira. I took her to the hospital first, then to my home, Ira replied. My wife had passed away the year before, and the house felt too empty. Carolina needed help, and I needed purpose. It worked out perfectly. Tell him about the ultrasound, Ford interjected from where he was helping Harlow with her drawing. Carolina's face lit up with a bittersweet smile. April 10th, 2018, my first prenatal appointment that I could actually afford, thanks to Ira. The technician kept moving the wand around, frowning at the screen. Then she called in the doctor. Quintuplets, Ira announced proudly. 5 healthy heartbeats, all developing perfectly despite the rough first trimester. Gustavo's eyes widened. 5 babies. The risks alone were astronomical. They were, Carolina confirmed. The doctors wanted to discuss selective reduction to improve the survival odds of the remaining babies. I refused. These children were already mine, all 5 of them, and I wasn't giving up a single one. That decision nearly killed her, Ira added solemnly. She spent 4 months on strict bed rest, complete activity restriction. I had to carry her to the bathroom. But you said she lived in her car during the pregnancy, Gustavo said, confused. That was later, Carolina explained. Ira took care of me beautifully until month 6. Then the medical bills started piling up. Even with insurance, the costs of a high-risk quintuplet pregnancy were overwhelming. I couldn't let him lose his house because of my medical expenses. So, she moved into her car in the hospital parking lot, Ford said, his voice tight with controlled anger. 32 weeks pregnant with 5 babies, sleeping in a Honda Civic so she could be close to the hospital when labor started. The night shift security guards knew me by name, Carolina added with dark humor. They'd bring me coffee and check on me every few hours. Good people, all of them. Gustavo buried his face in his hands. Carolina, I had no idea. If you'd known, what would you have done? She asked sharply. Come back. Apologized? Helped raise the children you said I was too old and infertile to give you. I don't know, he admitted honestly. I was a different person then, selfish, shallow, focused on all the wrong things. Yes, you were, Carolina agreed, her tone devoid of malice. But I didn't have the luxury of being selfish. I had 5 lives depending on me. Tell him about the birth. Dylan called out from her coloring station, apparently listening despite appearing focused on her artwork. You know this story, sweetheart? Carolina asked, surprised. But he doesn't, Dylan replied matter-of-factly. And it's a good story. Carolina smiled at her daughter's logic. August 20th, 2018. I went into labor at 4 a.m. in the hospital parking lot. Early, even for quintuplets. The contractions hit so fast and hard I could barely reach the emergency button I'd installed in my car. Emergency button? Gustavo asked. Ira's idea, she explained. A direct line to the maternity ward. When I pressed it, they had a team waiting for me by the time I staggered through the doors. 5 girls born within 18 minutes. Ira continued the story. Destiny first, then Poppy, Dylan, Harlow, and finally little Vad. Each one fighting for life with their mother's determination. They were so tiny, Carolina whispered, lost in the memory. 2 pounds each, maybe less, translucent skin, barely breathing on their own, but so beautiful, so perfect. How long in the NICU? Gustavo asked. 14 weeks. 98 days of watching my babies fight for every breath, every ounce of weight gain, every developmental milestone. I lived in that hospital, sleeping in waiting room chairs, eating from vending machines, and building your first business, Ford added with pride. Business. Gustavo looked confused. Carolina's expression shifted, the pain of memory replaced by the satisfaction of triumph. I had a lot of time to think during those hospital vigils. I watched the NICU staff struggle with outdated systems, inefficient processes, communication breakdowns that could have killed my babies. So, I designed a better system. A comprehensive patient management software specifically for neonatal intensive care, Ira explained. Better monitoring, improved communication between shifts, predictive analytics for potential complications. I wrote the initial code on library computers during the few hours each day when I couldn't be with the babies, Carolina continued. By the time the girls came home, I had a working prototype. And your first client? Gustavo asked, genuinely fascinated. The hospital where my daughters were born, Carolina said with quiet pride. They saw the difference it could make and agreed to test it. Within 6 months, we'd reduced patient complications by 30% and improved staff efficiency by 40%. The news spread like wildfire through the medical community, Ford added, his tone carrying a hint of pride. Hospitals across the country clamored for the system. Within 2 years, Carolina's company was processing data for over 200 NICUs nationwide. But how did you fund the expansion? Gustavo asked, still grappling with the enormity of what he was hearing. Starting a tech company requires significant capital. That's where I came in again, Ira said with a warm smile. I'd spent 40 years building a construction empire before retiring. I recognized genius when I saw it, and Carolina had something extraordinary. I invested everything I had in her vision. And Ford, Gustavo turned to the younger man, curiosity mingling with an unspoken thread of jealousy. I was working for a competing software company when I first encountered Carolina's system, Ford explained. It was so far superior to anything else on the market that I quit my job and asked if she needed help. That was 4 years ago. He's being modest, Carolina interjected. Ford revolutionized our architecture and helped us expand into general hospital management systems. He's the reason we went from a small NICU-focused startup to a comprehensive healthcare technology powerhouse. Empire, Gustavo repeated, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. LIM Solutions, Carolina announced proudly. We now provide software solutions to over 3,000 hospitals worldwide. Last year's revenue? $2.8 billion. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gustavo, whose inherited wealth totaled perhaps $50 million, struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what Carolina had achieved. $2.8 billion, he whispered, stunned. With AB, Poppy chimed in cheerfully from her coloring station. Mommy teaches us about numbers. We're going to be business ladies like her when we grow up. The Ferrari was a celebration purchase, Carolina explained. When we signed our largest contract last month, $100 million seemed fitting for a company that started in a hospital parking lot. Gustavo sat in silence, trying to process everything he'd learned. The woman he'd dismissed as worthless had built a global empire. The children he'd never known existed were brilliant, confident, and deeply loved. The life he'd thrown away had continued without him, thriving in ways he'd never imagined possible. I don't understand, he finally admitted. Why come back now? Why show up at my wedding? You didn't need me. You obviously don't need anything from me. Carolina glanced at her daughters, all 5 absorbed in their activities, but clearly listening to every word. Because they asked, she said simply. Last month, for the first time, they began asking serious questions about their father. Not just casual curiosity, but real ones. Who he was, why he wasn't part of their lives, whether he might want to meet them someday. And what did you tell them? Gustavo pressed. The truth. That their father made a mistake and wasn't ready to be a parent when they were born, but that people can change and grow. I told them that if they wanted to meet him, I'd make it happen. So you tracked down my wedding, Gustavo said, piecing it together. Public records, social media, wedding announcements. It wasn't hard to find information about Gustavo Ramos marrying Miranda Mathis in the Hamptons. My timing was coincidental, but perhaps fitting, Carolina replied neutrally. A day meant to celebrate new beginnings seemed appropriate for introductions. You could have called, written a letter, arranged a private meeting, Gustavo countered. I could have, Carolina agreed. But I wanted you to see them in context, not as an obligation or a burden, but as they really are, confident, intelligent, beloved children who didn't need you but might want to know you. And now? Gustavo asked quietly. Now that's up to you, Carolina replied. They've met their father. The mystery is solved. Whether you want to be part of their lives going forward is your choice to make. She stood gracefully, gathering her purse and signaling to the girls that their impromptu visit was coming to an end. Girls, time to go. Say goodbye to your father. 5 little voices chorused in unison. Goodbye, Daddy. Their words carried the casual politeness of children who might, or might not, see him again. Their future entirely dependent on choices made by adults they barely knew. As they prepared to leave, Gustavo realized he was standing at the most pivotal crossroads of his life. Behind him lay 6 years of mistakes and missed opportunities. Ahead stretched the possibility of redemption, but only if he was brave enough to choose it. Wait, Gustavo called out as Carolina began leading the quintuplets toward the golden Ferrari. His voice carried a desperation he didn't try to hide. Please don't go yet. Carolina paused, her hand resting protectively on Destiny's shoulder. Gustavo, it's been a long day for everyone. The girls need dinner, he interrupted, then caught himself. I mean all of you here. The restaurant is still set up from the reception that never happened. Please. The quintuplets looked up at their mother with identical expressions of curiosity. They'd been remarkably patient throughout the day's chaos, but their 6-year-old attention spans were beginning to fray. Can we, Mommy? Poppy asked. I'm hungry. And the man with the fancy uniform said they have chicken nuggets. Carolina glanced at Ford and Ira, seeking their input. Ford shrugged. It's your call, but the girls should eat soon. It might be good for them to spend time with their father in a normal setting. Ira added quietly. Less dramatic than today's introduction. All right, Carolina decided. But just dinner. Then we're driving back to Connecticut tonight. Relief flooded Gustavo's face. Thank you. I'll arrange everything. 20 minutes later, they were seated at a round table on the restaurant's outdoor terrace, overlooking the manicured gardens where the wedding ceremony had taken place hours earlier. The abandoned altar had been cleared away, but rose petals still dotted the grass like confetti from a celebration that never happened. The quintuplets had arranged themselves strategically around the table. Destiny and Adilyn flanked Carolina. Poppy and Vad nestled between Ford and Ira, and little Harlow sat beside Gustavo, studying him with frank curiosity. You have the same chin as us, Harlow observed, tilting her head. But your hair is different. My hair used to be darker when I was younger, Gustavo replied, unconsciously running a hand through his salt and pepper locks. It changes color as you get older. Will our hair change colors too? Vad asked from across the table. Maybe a little when you're much older, but not for many, many years, Gustavo assured her. Good, Poppy declared. I like my hair the way it is. The server appeared with children's menus and crayons, though the girls seemed more interested in their father than in coloring. Their questions came in rapid succession, delivered with the innocent directness that only children possessed. Why didn't you come to our birthday party? Adilyn asked. Because I didn't know when your birthday was, Gustavo answered honestly. It's August 20th, Destiny informed him solemnly. We're Leo babies. Mommy says Leos are brave and strong. August 20th, Gustavo repeated, committing the date to memory. I'll remember that now. What's your favorite color? Harlow continued her interrogation. Blue, I think. What's yours? Purple and pink and sometimes yellow when I'm happy. What makes you happy? Gustavo asked, genuinely curious. Pancakes, Harlow replied immediately. And when Mommy reads us stories. And when Uncle Ford plays airplane with us. And ice cream. Ice cream makes everyone happy. Gustavo smiled. That's true. As the conversation flowed, Carolina watched Gustavo interact with their daughters with growing amazement. The man who had once deemed her too old and infertile was now patiently answering endless questions from 5 precocious 6-year-olds, his face lighting up with each new discovery about their personalities. Do you live in a big house? Vad asked. Pretty big, Gustavo replied. But not as big as yours, I bet. Our house has a library with a rolling ladder, Poppy announced proudly, and a pool with a slide. And each of us has our own room, but we usually all sleep in Destiny's room anyway. Why Destiny's room? Gustavo wondered aloud. Because she has the best night light, Adilyn explained. It makes stars on the ceiling. That sounds wonderful, Gustavo said, and meant it. The server returned to take their orders. The girls ordered with impressive politeness, each saying please and thank you without prompting. Their manners were impeccable, clearly the result of careful training. You've raised them beautifully, Gustavo said quietly to Carolina once the server had left. We've raised them beautifully, Carolina corrected, gesturing to include Ford and Ira. It takes a village. I want to be part of that village, Gustavo blurted suddenly, surprising everyone, including himself. I know I have no right to ask, and I know I don't deserve it, but I want to be their father. Really be their father, not just the man whose DNA they share. Ford leaned forward, his protective instincts engaged. That's a big statement, Gustavo. Being a father isn't something you do part-time when it's convenient. I know that now, Gustavo replied earnestly. I didn't understand it 6 years ago, but I do now. Understanding and doing are different things, Ira interjected gently. These girls have structure, stability, routine. They've never known disappointment from a parent figure because Carolina has never let them down. If you want to be part of their lives, you need to be reliable, always. I can be reliable, Gustavo insisted. Can you? Carolina asked skeptically. You've built your entire adult life around convenience and personal pleasure. When Miranda wanted something, you gave it to her. When I needed you most, you cast me aside. What happens when being a father becomes inconvenient? The truth of her words stung like salt on an open wound. But Gustavo didn't flinch. Then I'll learn to put someone else's needs before my own, he said firmly. I'll learn to be the man these girls deserve. Learning takes time, Ford interjected pointedly. And children don't wait for adults to figure things out. They need consistency now, not eventually. So teach me, Gustavo said, his gaze locking onto Carolina's. I know I don't deserve it, but show me how to be their father. I'll do whatever it takes. Before Carolina could respond, Destiny's small voice pierced through the weighty silence. "Daddy," she ventured tentatively, testing the unfamiliar word. "Why did you leave Mommy when we were still in her tummy?" The question brought the table to a standstill. Even the other girls paused their chatter, sensing the gravity of the moment. Gustavo looked at his eldest daughter, her serious hazel eyes so much like his own, and made the choice to answer honestly. "Because I was scared," he admitted simply. "I thought I wanted children, but when it came time to face that reality, I panicked and made a terrible mistake. I left because I was a coward, not because of anything you or your mommy did wrong." "But you're not scared anymore?" Poppy asked, her brow furrowed with 6-year-old logic. "I'm still scared," Gustavo confessed. "But now I'm more afraid of missing out on knowing all of you than I am of being a father." "Good," Adilyn declared sagely. "Mommy says being scared is okay as long as you do the right thing anyway." The arrival of the food provided a welcome reprieve from the emotional intensity. The quintuplets eagerly dove into animated conversations about school, their tutors, their upcoming dance recital, and their individual passions. Gustavo listened intently, marveling at the distinct personalities blossoming before him. Destiny loved books about space. Poppy dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Adilyn wrote poetry. And Harlow and Vad were obsessed with marine biology. "We're going to study dolphins," Harlow announced between bites of chicken. "Uncle Ford is taking us to the aquarium in Mystic next weekend." "That sounds educational," Gustavo remarked, then hesitated. Would it be possible for me to come along? If that's okay with everyone." The girls turned expectant eyes toward their mother. Carolina chewed slowly, considering the logistics. "It's a 4-hour drive each way," she cautioned. "And the girls tend to get car sick sometimes. Plus, Vad has a habit of wandering off in crowded places. And Poppy asks approximately 3,000 questions per hour." "I can handle questions and car sickness," Gustavo replied without hesitation. "And I'll keep an eye on Vad." "You don't know what you're volunteering for," Ford warned with a wry smile. "A day out with all 5 of them is like herding cats, brilliant, energetic, opinionated cats." "I want to learn," Gustavo insisted. "I want to know what their favorite exhibits are, what makes them laugh, what scares them. I want to be the person they think of when they need help, comfort, or someone to share good news with." "That's Uncle Ford and Grandpa Ira," Vad pointed out matter-of-factly. "I know," Gustavo said gently, "and I'm grateful they've been there for you. But maybe there's room for one more person who loves you." The girls exchanged glances, communicating silently in that mysterious way only children can. "We could try it," Destiny said carefully. "But you have to promise not to disappear again." "I promise," Gustavo vowed solemnly. "I will never disappear from your lives again." "What about Aunt Miranda?" Adilyn asked bluntly. "She seemed very angry at us." Gustavo's jaw tightened. "Miranda is no longer part of my life. She said terrible things about you today, and I'll never forgive that. You are my daughters, and anyone who can't love you doesn't deserve to be in my life." "But you were going to marry her," Poppy countered, her logic cutting like a knife. "I was going to make another terrible mistake," Gustavo admitted. "But you stopped me from doing that. You saved me from ruining my life again." As dinner wound down, the conversation grew more personal. Gustavo learned about bedtime routines, favorite books, food preferences, and the intricate social dynamics of 5 sisters who shared everything yet maintained their unique identities. Destiny read to them every night, Harlow explained. Poppy protected them if anyone was mean, according to Vad. She's very fierce. Adilyn composed songs about everything. She'd even written one about their goldfish that had made Mommy cry happy tears. And Harlow and Vad always shared everything, Poppy added proudly. Even if there's only one cookie left, they break it in half. Watching his daughters talk about each other with such love and loyalty, Gustavo felt a profound shift in his understanding of family. These weren't just his biological children. They were a complete unit, a thriving ecosystem that had flourished without him. "I have a confession," he said as they prepared to leave. "I don't know how to be a father to 5 children. I don't know the rules or the routines or what to do when someone gets hurt or scared." "That's okay," Destiny reassured him kindly. "We can teach you. We're very good teachers. We taught Uncle Ford how to braid hair." Adilyn chimed in helpfully. "And we taught Grandpa Ira how to play video games." Poppy added, "Teaching Daddy how to be a daddy will be easy," Harlow declared with absolute confidence. As they walked toward the parking area, Gustavo felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a deep, abiding hope. Not the fleeting optimism of a business deal or the temporary thrill of a new romance, but the enduring hope that came from finally understanding what truly mattered. His daughters skipped ahead, their energy buoyed by food and the novelty of having a father to impress. Carolina walked beside him in comfortable silence, her protective instincts still sharp but no longer defensive. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me this chance, for raising them so beautifully, for being stronger than I ever imagined possible." "Don't thank me yet," Carolina replied. "Being their father won't be easy. They're wonderful children, but they're also strong-willed, demanding, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status. They'll judge you by your actions, not your promises." "Good," Gustavo said, meaning every word. "I want them to have high standards. I want them to expect the best from the people in their lives." "Then don't let them down," Carolina said simply. As they reached the golden Ferrari, the quintuplets gathered around their mother for goodbye hugs and kisses. But for the first time, they also approached Gustavo. "Goodbye, Daddy," Destiny said formally, offering her hand for a shake. Gustavo accepted it with appropriate seriousness. One by one, each daughter said goodbye, their farewells ranging from Poppy's enthusiastic hug to Dylan's careful wave. When it was over, Gustavo stood alone in the gathering dusk, watching the taillights of the Ferrari disappear down the long driveway. For the first time in 6 years, he felt like he might finally be on the right path. 1 week had passed since the wedding that never happened, and Gustavo's world had become unrecognizable. His Southampton mansion, once a trophy of success and bachelorhood, now felt hollow and pretentious. Empty rooms filled with expensive art and designer furniture seemed like monuments to a shallow existence. He stood in his home office, staring at the framed photos covering his desk. Pictures of him and Miranda at various society events, smiling faces draped in couture, looked foreign to him now. In contrast, a single printed photo sat prominently in the center. The quintuplets at dinner last Sunday, their faces animated as they explained their favorite sea creatures to him. His phone buzzed with another text from Miranda. "Asterisk, we need to talk. This isn't over." Asterisk, Gustavo deleted the message unread. Miranda had been relentless all week, alternating between threats, manipulation, and promises to forgive him if he'd come to his senses. She'd even sent her lawyer after his, claiming breach of promise and demanding compensation for the ruined wedding. None of it mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was the aquarium trip planned for today, his first real outing as a father. The drive to Carolina's Connecticut estate took exactly 90 minutes, giving Gustavo ample time to rehearse conversations with his daughters and second-guess every decision he'd made since last Sunday. He'd bought books on child development, researched appropriate gifts for 6-year-olds, and even practiced braiding hair on a mannequin head his bewildered housekeeper had purchased for him. When he finally arrived at Carolina's home, it exceeded even his elevated expectations. The modern glass and steel structure sat on 50 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds, with a circular driveway leading to an entrance that managed to be both impressive and welcoming. "This isn't just wealth," he murmured to himself. "This is wealth with purpose and taste. Daddy's here." Poppy's voice rang out before he'd even parked his Bentley. All 5 girls came running from the house, their excitement genuine and infectious. "We've been ready for an hour," Destiny announced, adjusting the small backpack on her shoulders. Mommy packed snacks, coloring books, and motion sickness medicine. "Motion sickness medicine?" Gustavo asked with concern. "Just in case," Carolina said, appearing behind the girls with Ford and Ira. "Harlow sometimes gets car sick on long drives." "I brought a bigger car," Gustavo offered, gesturing to his spacious Bentley SUV. "More room to spread out." "That's thoughtful," Carolina acknowledged with a faint smile. The car seats were already installed, having been meticulously transferred from Carolina's vehicle to Gustavo's Bentley SUV. He marveled at the sheer complexity of traveling with 5 children: booster seats, entertainment systems, snack containers, first aid kits, spare clothes for each child, and enough backup supplies to handle any conceivable emergency. "This is more equipment than I took on business trips to Europe," he muttered under his breath as he struggled with the safety harness on Vad's seat. "Welcome to parenthood," Ford said with a chuckle, effortlessly untangling the straps. Gustavo had nodded in frustration. "Everything takes 3 times longer and requires twice as much planning. But it's worth it," Ira added, watching the girls excitedly debate which exhibits they wanted to see first. "Every moment of chaos is worth it." 20 minutes later, they were finally loaded and ready to depart. Carolina climbed into the passenger seat, while Ford and Ira followed in Carolina's Tesla. The girls filled the back 2 rows of the Bentley, their chatter creating a symphony of excitement and anticipation that filled the car. The first hour of the drive went smoothly. The girls sang songs, played games, and peppered Gustavo with questions about his childhood, favorite animals, and whether he'd ever been to an aquarium before. "I went to the one in Boston when I was about your age," he told them. "But that was a very long time ago." "Were there dolphins then?" Harlow asked seriously. "Yes, sweetheart. Dolphins have been around much longer than people." "Good," Vad declared. "Because dolphins are the smartest animals in the ocean." "Actually," Dylan corrected gently, "octopuses might be smarter. They can solve puzzles, open jars, and change colors. But dolphins save people," Poppy argued. "That's smarter than opening jars." The debate continued good-naturedly until they stopped for gas in New Haven. That's when everything unraveled. As Gustavo pumped gas, his phone rang. Miranda's face appeared on the screen. Before he could decline the call, Destiny's curious voice piped up from the back seat. "Daddy, who's that lady on your phone?" "She's pretty." Carolina, who had been scrolling through her own phone, looked up sharply. Her expression hardened when she saw Miranda's photo still displayed on Gustavo's screen. "Why do you still have pictures of her in your phone?" Carolina asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I haven't had time to delete them," Gustavo replied, quickly declining the call. "It's not important." "Not important?" Carolina's tone turned icy. "The woman you were going to marry a week ago isn't important enough to delete from your phone?" The girls, sensing tension, grew quiet in the back seat. Their excited chatter faded as they watched their parents with confused concern. "Carolina, it doesn't mean anything," Gustavo insisted. "I just haven't cleaned out my phone yet. I haven't had time." Carolina's laugh held no humor. "You've had 7 days. How long does it take to delete a contact?" "You're right," Gustavo admitted, fumbling with his phone. "I'll do it right now." But as he tried to delete Miranda's information, the phone rang again. This time, Miranda's voice filled the car through the Bluetooth system before Gustavo could stop it. "Gustavo, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all week. We need to talk about this ridiculous situation. I'm willing to forgive you for your temporary insanity, but we need to handle this properly." "Miranda, I can't talk right now," Gustavo said desperately, trying to disconnect the call. "Who is this Miranda person?" Poppy demanded from the back seat. "And why is she talking to our daddy?" "She's the lady from the wedding," Destiny explained quietly. "The one who called us mean names. Is that little Charlotte?" Miranda's voice continued through the speakers, dripping with false sweetness. "How precious, Gustavo. Surely you realize this whole charade has gone far enough. These children aren't really yours. And even if they were, you can't possibly think your father material. I've spoken to my lawyers, and we can make this whole problem disappear. A nice settlement for the woman, boarding schools for the children, and we can get back to our real life together." The car fell silent except for Miranda's voice continuing to poison the air. Carolina's face had gone white with rage. "Turn it off," she said quietly. "I'm trying," Gustavo said frantically, stabbing at his phone. "Turn it off now." Carolina's voice rose to a shout that made all 5 girls jump. Finally, the call disconnected, leaving a terrible silence in its wake. "Mommy," Vad's small voice trembled with confusion. "Why did that lady say we aren't really Daddy's children? And what did she mean about making us disappear?" Harlow added, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Why does she want to send us away?" Carolina turned in her seat to face her daughters, her maternal instincts overriding her anger. "Girls, that woman is confused and saying hurtful things. You are absolutely your father's children, and nobody is going anywhere." But the damage was done. The excitement and joy of their family outing had been shattered by Miranda's cruelty and Gustavo's failure to protect them from it. "I want to go home," Dylan said quietly. "I don't want to go to the aquarium anymore." "Me too," agreed Destiny. "My stomach feels sick." "Mine too," chorused the other 3. Carolina looked at Gustavo with disappointment, so profound it felt like a physical blow. "Start the car," she said coldly. "Carolina, please let me explain. Miranda doesn't speak for me. I don't want her back. I would never send the girls away. Start the car." "But the aquarium, the dolphins, they were so excited." "They're not excited anymore," Carolina said flatly. "They're hurt and confused and scared. thanks to your ex-fiancé and your inability to set proper boundaries. As Gustavo pulled back onto the highway, heading toward Connecticut instead of Mystic, the girls remained unusually quiet. Their questions, when they came, were whispered and heartbreaking. "Daddy," Destiny asked softly, "do you want to send us to boarding school?" "No, sweetheart. Never. I want you to stay exactly where you are, happy and loved." "But that lady said you did," Poppy pointed out with devastating logic. "That lady is wrong about everything," Gustavo replied firmly. "I don't love her. I don't want to marry her, and I would never, ever send you away." "Then why didn't you tell her that?" Adilyn asked. "When she was saying mean things about us, why didn't you stop her?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Why hadn't he stopped Miranda immediately? Why had he allowed her voice to fill the car with poison directed at his children? "I should have," he admitted quietly. "I should have protected you from hearing those things. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix it," Carolina said coldly from the passenger seat. "Sorry doesn't erase what they heard." The rest of the drive passed in oppressive silence. The girls dozed fitfully, exhausted by emotional stress. Carolina stared out the window, her body language radiating disappointment and anger. Gustavo drove mechanically, replaying the disaster over and over in his mind. When they finally reached Carolina's estate, the girls climbed out of the car with none of their earlier enthusiasm. They hugged their mother tightly, seeking comfort and reassurance. "Girls, go inside with Uncle Ford and Grandpa Ira," Carolina instructed gently. "I need to talk to your father privately." As soon as the children were out of earshot, Carolina turned on Gustavo with fury that had been building for 2 hours. "How dare you," she said, her voice shaking with controlled rage. "How dare you expose my children to that woman's venom?" "It was an accident," Gustavo protested. "I didn't mean for them to hear any of that." "An accident?" Carolina's laugh was bitter. "You still have her photos in your phone. You still take her calls. You're still emotionally available to a woman who wants to destroy your children's lives. That's not an accident. That's a choice. I'm not emotionally available to Miranda. I hate her for what she said today. But you didn't hate her enough to delete her number. You didn't hate her enough to block her calls. You didn't hate her enough to protect your daughters from her poison." "I will now," Gustavo said desperately. "I'll delete everything. I'll block her completely. I'll get a restraining order if necessary." "It's too late," Carolina said quietly, and her calm was more frightening than her anger had been. "Those children trusted you. They let you into their hearts, and you failed them at the first real test. Give me another chance. Please, I'll do better." "Better?" Carolina shook her head. "Gustavo, this wasn't a mistake. This was a revelation. When push came to shove, when your children needed you to choose between them and your past, you hesitated. You let Miranda's voice fill their world with cruelty while you fumbled with a phone you should have cleaned out days ago. I choose them," Gustavo said urgently. "I choose my daughters. I choose you. I choose this family." "You're 6 years too late," Carolina replied, turning toward her house. "And today proved that you're still not ready to be the father they deserve." As she walked away, Gustavo called after her desperately. "What can I do? How can I fix this?" Carolina paused at her front door, not turning around. "You can't fix this, Gustavo. Some things, once broken, stay broken. My daughter's trust is one of them." The door closed behind her with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Gustavo alone in the gathering darkness. The ruins of his second chance scattered around him like the abandoned rose petals from his wedding that never was. Inside the house, 5 little girls gathered around their mother, their voices tinged with worry. "Is Daddy ever coming back?" they asked in unison. For the first time since their birth, Carolina couldn't offer them a reassuring answer. 1 week had passed since the disastrous aquarium trip, and Gustavo found himself sitting in his car outside Carolina's estate gates, unable to muster the courage to press the intercom button. This had become his daily ritual, driving 90 minutes from Southampton each morning, parking just out of sight, watching snippets of his daughters' lives through the wrought iron gates, then retreating home without making contact. The security cameras surely noticed him by now, yet no one had asked him to leave. Perhaps Carolina allowed these pitiful vigils out of pity, or perhaps she simply didn't care enough to acknowledge him at all. Through the ornate ironwork, he could see the quintuplets bundled in matching pink coats, constructing something elaborate in the sandbox under Ford's watchful eye. Their laughter floated on the crisp autumn breeze, a sound that simultaneously filled his heart with warmth and shattered it into pieces. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Asterisk Miranda's harassment suit dismissed. Judge called it frivolous. She's also been served with the restraining order as requested. Asterisk too little, too late, Gustavo muttered to himself. Over the past week, he'd systematically erased every trace of Miranda from his life, blocked phone numbers, deleted photos, informed mutual friends that any further contact would result in legal action. He'd even hired a private investigator to document her attempts to reach him, building a case for stalking charges if necessary. But none of it mattered. His daughters had heard Miranda's venomous words, and he'd failed to shield them from the poison. Another text arrived, this one from Ira Goodman. Asterisk meet me at Starbucks on Route 7 in Wilton. 1 hour. Come alone. Asterisk Gustavo stared at the message, hope and dread wrestling within him. Ira hadn't spoken to him since the aquarium fiasco, though Ford had called twice to deliver brutally honest assessments of his failures as a father. 45 minutes later, Gustavo sat across from Ira in a quiet corner booth, 2 untouched coffee cups between them. The older man studied him with the analytical gaze of someone who'd built an empire by reading people accurately. You look terrible, Ira observed bluntly. I feel worse, Gustavo admitted. How are the girls? Confused. Hurt. Asking questions their mother can't answer without lying to them. Ira's tone was matter-of-fact, not cruel, but somehow that made it sting more. What kind of questions? Gustavo asked hesitantly. Whether their daddy is coming back. Whether they did something wrong. Whether the mean lady was right about them not being your real children. Ira paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Carolina's been honest with them, but 6-year-olds don't understand adult failures. They personalize everything. Gustavo buried his face in his hands. I never meant for them to hear any of that. I would cut off my own arm before intentionally hurting those children. But you did hurt them, Ira pointed out. Intentions don't matter to a 6-year-old who heard someone suggest she should be sent away to boarding school. How do I fix it? Gustavo pleaded. That's the wrong question, Ira replied. The right question is, are you capable of being the father they need? Not the father you want to be, not the father you think you should be, but the father they actually require. I don't know, Gustavo confessed. I thought I was ready, but last week proved I'm still making selfish choices. I kept Miranda's contact information because some part of me wasn't ready to fully commit to this new life. At least you're honest about it, Ira acknowledged. But honesty doesn't help my daughters. They needed me to choose them completely, and I hesitated. What kind of father does that make me? Gustavo asked, his voice heavy with self-loathing. It makes you human, Ira said after a long pause, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Flawed. Imperfect. Learning. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know what I can do, Gustavo admitted. Carolina won't take my calls. The girls probably never want to see me again. I've ruined everything. Have you? Ira countered. Haven't you? He pulled out his phone and showed Gustavo a photo. 5 little girls sat around Carolina's kitchen table, each holding a crane and working on identical drawings. What are they drawing? Gustavo asked softly. Pictures for you, Ira replied. They've been making them every day this week. Cards, drawings, letters they can't quite write yet, but dictate to their mother. All for their daddy. Tears welled in Gustavo's eyes. They're still thinking about me. Children forgive more easily than adults, Ira explained. But they also trust more completely. If you break that trust again, there won't be a third chance. So what do I do? Gustavo asked desperately. You prove you've changed, not with words, but with actions. Consistent, reliable, selfless actions that put their needs above your comfort every single time. How? Gustavo pressed. You want to be their father? Then act like it, Ira said firmly. Not when it's convenient, not when it feels good, but every day. Whether they forgive you or not. Whether Carolina ever speaks to you again or not. You show up for those children no matter what. But Carolina won't let me see them, Gustavo argued. I'm not talking about visitation, Ira clarified. I'm talking about being present in their lives in every way you can. Want to know what they need. Security. Stability. The knowledge that their father exists and cares about them, even when he's not physically there. Ira pulled out a tablet and showed Gustavo a series of documents. Educational trust funds for each girl, college funds designed to grow with compound interest, medical insurance covering every possible need, emergency funds for anything Carolina might require for their care. Are you telling me to buy their forgiveness? Gustavo asked, his voice tight. I'm telling you to take responsibility, Ira corrected sharply. Those children exist because of choices you made. They're thriving despite choices you made. They're your daughters, and that comes with obligations, whether you ever see them again or not. Gustavo studied the trust fund documents, seeing numbers that represented security and opportunity for his daughters. This is millions of dollars. It's less than you spent on cars last year, Ira pointed out, and significantly less than Carolina spent building her empire to support them when you weren't there. What else? Gustavo asked. Letters, not to Carolina, but to each girl individually. Weekly letters about your life, your thoughts, your hopes for their futures. Letters they can read when they're older, so they know their father was thinking about them even when they couldn't be together. And if they never want to read them, then you'll have written them anyway. Being a parent means doing the right thing without guarantee of appreciation or reward. Ira showed him more documents. Scholarship funds established at 5 different universities, each named for one of his daughters. The Destiny Ramos Scholarship for Future Scientists, the Poppy Ramos Fund for Young Advocates. This is what fathers do, Ira explained. They build legacies for their children. They create opportunities. They open doors their children might want to walk through someday. But what about seeing them? Gustavo asked. What about being part of their daily lives? That's Carolina's choice to make, Ira replied gently but firmly. And frankly, you haven't earned it yet. She trusted you with her children's hearts, and you broke that trust. Rebuilding it will take time, consistency, and proof that you've fundamentally changed. How long? Gustavo asked. However long it takes, months, years, maybe never. But you do it anyway because they're your daughters, and you owe them a father who chooses them every single day. With trembling hands, Gustavo signed the trust fund documents, each signature representing a commitment larger than any business deal he'd ever made. There's one more thing, Ira said, producing a final document. Custody papers, not to fight Carolina for the girls, but to formally acknowledge his parental rights and responsibilities. Legal recognition that he was their father and would support them financially and emotionally for the rest of their lives. Even if I never see them again? Gustavo asked. Especially if you never see them again, Ira emphasized. Love isn't conditional on proximity, Gustavo. Parenthood isn't conditional on forgiveness. As they left the coffee shop, Ira handed Gustavo a manila envelope. Pictures from this week. Videos of them playing, laughing, learning. Carolina thought you should see them, even if you can't be with them. She's letting me have pictures? Gustavo asked, stunned. She's letting you be their father in the only way she feels safe allowing right now, Ira replied. Don't waste it. That evening, Gustavo sat in his home office, surrounded by legal documents that represented the most important commitments of his life. The trust funds were established. The scholarship foundations were created. The custody papers were filed. He opened the envelope from Ira and spread the photos across his desk. His daughters building sandcastles, reading books, dancing in their backyard, helping their mother cook dinner. A week of their lives he'd missed because of his own failures. Taking out his laptop, Gustavo began typing the first of what would become hundreds of letters to his daughters. Asterisk, Dear Destiny, my brilliant, thoughtful firstborn daughter, today, I want to tell you about the stars because I know how much you love them. When I look at the night sky now, I think about how you light up the world the same way. Asterisk, as he wrote, Gustavo finally understood what Ira had been trying to teach him. Being a father wasn't about being present for the good moments or the convenient times. It was about showing up, consistently and unconditionally, whether they saw him or not. It was about choosing them every single day, no matter what. It was about choosing his daughters every single day, whether they noticed or not, whether they forgave him or not, whether he ever earned the title of daddy again. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic apologies. It was about love without conditions, commitment without expecting rewards, and hope without guarantees. For the first time in his life, Gustavo was ready to be that kind of father. What would you do if your chance at redemption came through actions alone, with no promise of forgiveness? How do you rebuild trust once it's been shattered? Exactly 11 months had passed since the disastrous aquarium trip, and Carolina stood in her kitchen, putting the finishing touches on 5 individual birthday cakes. Each cake was a masterpiece, tailored to reflect its recipient's personality. A galaxy-themed creation for Destiny, complete with edible stars. A courthouse cake for Poppy, adorned with tiny fondant scales of justice. A book-shaped confection for Dylan, covered in intricate fondant poems, and matching ocean-inspired cakes for Harlow and Vad, featuring vibrant coral reefs and leaping dolphins. "Mommy, are you sure Daddy's coming?" Destiny asked for the 10th time that morning, her voice carrying the cautious optimism of a 7-year-old who'd learned, painfully, that adults sometimes disappoint. "He'll be here, sweetheart," Carolina replied, though her own certainty had been hard-won. Over the past 11 months, Gustavo had done something unprecedented. He'd kept every single promise he'd made. Weekly letters arrived without fail, each one addressed individually to its recipient and brimming with stories, encouragement, and unconditional love. The trust funds and scholarship foundations were thriving. Most importantly, he'd shown up for every milestone. School plays, dance recitals, medical appointments, parent-teacher conferences. Sitting quietly in the back, never approaching unless invited, but always present. Always there, proving through consistency what words alone could not. "Look," Poppy shouted from the living room window. "There's Daddy's car." All 5 girls rushed to the window, pressing their faces against the glass as Gustavo's familiar Bentley pulled through the estate gates. But today, he wasn't alone. "Who's that with him?" Dylan wondered aloud, pointing at the passenger seat. Carolina joined her daughters at the window, her heart skipping a beat as she recognized Ford Benson climbing out of the driver's side. Gustavo emerged from the passenger seat, his arms laden with carefully wrapped presents. "Uncle Ford picked you up, Daddy?" Harlow asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "That's interesting," Carolina murmured, watching the 2 men who had become the most important figures in her daughters' lives walk toward the house together. The doorbell rang, and 5 excited voices chorused, "Come in," before Carolina could reach the door. Gustavo entered first, looking nothing like the man who had abandoned her 6 years ago. His hair was now completely silver, laugh lines deepened around his eyes, and his expensive suits had been replaced by jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt that made him look approachable rather than intimidating. "Happy birthday, my beautiful girls," he said, kneeling down as all 5 daughters surrounded him for hugs that had grown natural and enthusiastic over months of careful relationship building. "Daddy, why did Uncle Ford drive you here?" Vad asked with characteristic directness. Ford cleared his throat, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "Well, your daddy and I had some things to discuss, and we thought today would be a good day to share some news with all of you." Carolina raised an eyebrow, suddenly nervous. Over the past year, she and Ford had grown closer, their partnership evolving from business to something deeper and more personal. But they'd been careful to keep their relationship private, not wanting to complicate Gustavo's delicate efforts to rebuild his bond with the girls. "What kind of news?" Destiny asked, ever the perceptive one. "The good kind," Gustavo said, his voice warm with genuine happiness. "But first, birthday presents and cake. Then we'll talk." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of wrapping paper, delighted squeals, and candle blowing. Gustavo's gifts were perfect: a telescope for Destiny, a complete set of children's law books for Poppy, a leather-bound journal embossed with gold lettering for Dylan, and matching marine biology field guides for Harlow and Vad. "These are exactly what we wanted," Harlow marveled, clutching her field guide. "How did you know?" Vad added. "Because I pay attention," Gustavo replied simply. "I listen when you talk about your dreams and interests. That's what daddies do." As the girls settled around the table with their individual cakes, Carolina found herself studying Gustavo's face. The man who had once dismissed her as too old and infertile now looked at their daughters with such profound love and pride that it took her breath away. "Okay," Poppy announced, having devoured her first slice of cake with characteristic efficiency. "Now tell us the news." Ford and Gustavo exchanged glances, and Ford nodded encouragingly. "Well," Gustavo began, "over the past few months, Uncle Ford and I have been working together on something special. We've been planning ways to make sure your family has everything it needs to be happy and secure." "Are you and Uncle Ford friends now?" Dylan asked. "We are," Gustavo confirmed. "Good friends. In fact, Uncle Ford has taught me more about being a father than anyone else ever could." He turned to Ford. "You've worked very hard this past year to become the father these girls deserve. I'm proud of the changes you've made." Ford looked surprised by the acknowledgement, but smiled warmly. "But there's something else," Gustavo continued, his tone growing more serious. He looked directly at Carolina, his expression tender yet resolute. "Your mother deserves to be with someone who loves her completely, unconditionally, and puts her happiness above everything else." Someone who sees her strength and brilliance and never tries to diminish it. Like Uncle Ford does, Destiny observed with 7-year-old wisdom. Exactly like Uncle Ford does, Gustavo agreed. And I want that for her because I love all of you, including your mother, enough to want what's best for you. Carolina felt tears pricking her eyes as she began to understand what was happening. Ford moved to kneel beside her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Carolina, he began, his voice steady and clear. These past few years have been the happiest of my life. Building a business with you, watching your daughters grow, being part of this incredible family. It's everything I never knew I wanted. I love your mother completely, he continued, addressing the girls. And I love each of you as if you were my own daughters. Carolina looked around the table at her daughters' expectant faces, at Gustavo's encouraging smile, and at Ford's hopeful expression. What do you think, girls? She asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Should I marry Uncle Ford? Yes. 5 voices shouted in unison, followed by excited chatter about weddings, dresses, and whether they could all be bridesmaids. Then yes, Carolina said, laughing through her tears as Ford slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, I'll marry you. The celebration that followed was chaotic and joyful, with the quintuplets clamoring to see the ring, peppering Ford with questions about whether he'd officially become their stepfather, and debating which wedding dress design would suit Carolina best. But what about Daddy? Harlow asked suddenly, voicing the question that had lingered beneath the excitement. All eyes turned to Gustavo, who smiled with genuine peace. I'll always be your daddy, sweetheart. Nothing will ever change that. But Uncle Ford will be your stepfather, which means you'll have 2 fathers who love you. That makes you very lucky girls. And will we all live together? Vad asked hopefully. Well, Carolina said carefully, Uncle Ford and I will live together after we're married, but Daddy has his own house, and you'll visit him there sometimes too. Actually, Gustavo interjected, I've been thinking about that. My house is too big for just me, and it's too far away from all of you. I'd like to find something closer, maybe in the same town, so I can be nearby when you need me. Really? Destiny's face lit up. Really, Gustavo affirmed. Because the most important thing in my life is being the best father I can be to you girls. That means being available when you need me, supporting your dreams, and making sure you always know how much you're loved. As the afternoon unfolded, the dynamics of their reconstituted family became clear. Gustavo would remain a devoted father, but Ford would be the day-to-day father figure. Carolina would finally have the love and partnership she deserved. And the quintuplets would have the security of knowing they were cherished by multiple adults who prioritized their well-being above all else. I have one more surprise, Gustavo announced as they sat on the back patio, watching the girls play in the garden. I've been working with a contractor to build something special. He pulled out architectural plans and spread them across the patio table. A playground right here on your property, custom designed with input from each girl about what they'd like to include. A playground just for us? Poppy gasped. The best playground in Connecticut, Gustavo promised, his eyes twinkling with pride. Complete with a cozy reading nook for Destiny, towering monkey bars for Poppy, a serene corner for Adilyn to jot down her thoughts, and an entire underwater-themed section for Harlow and Vad, complete with dolphin-shaped swings and coral-patterned climbing walls. The playground was nothing short of magical. When does construction start? All 5 girls demanded in unison. Next week, Gustavo replied with a grin. And it should be ready by Christmas. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, the 3 adults sat together on the back patio while the children played nearby. The conversation flowed effortlessly between them. Discussions about wedding plans, custody schedules, and shared responsibilities intertwined with laughter and moments of quiet understanding. I need to say something, Gustavo said suddenly, his tone serious yet heartfelt. Ford, I know how hard it must have been to watch me hurt Carolina and the girls. Thank you for stepping in when I didn't. Thank you for loving them when I was too selfish to do it right. Thank you for changing, Ford responded simply. For becoming the father they needed. It would have been easier to walk away forever, but you chose to do the hard work instead. Carolina listened as the 2 men who had shaped her daughter's lives spoke with mutual respect and genuine affection. This wasn't the life she'd envisioned 6 years ago, but it was richer, fuller, and far more beautiful than anything she could have dreamed up. Mommy, Destiny called from the garden. Come see what we built. The trio joined the quintuplets around an elaborate fairy house constructed from twigs, leaves, and boundless imagination. It's for the fairy godmothers, Adilyn explained, her voice brimming with earnestness. The ones who make sure families find each other. Even when they take a long time to figure it out, Harlow added, glancing meaningfully at the adults. And even when they make mistakes first, Vad finished, her words lingering in the twilight air as they admired the whimsical creation. Carolina felt a deep sense of fulfillment wash over her. Her daughters had their father, their stepfather, their mother, and most importantly, the unshakable knowledge that they were loved unconditionally by everyone who mattered. 6 years ago, Gustavo had dismissed her as too old and infertile before abandoning her for someone younger. Today, surrounded by their 5 remarkable daughters and preparing to marry a man who cherished her completely, Carolina realized that sometimes the sweetest revenge is living well and loving deeply. The golden Ferrari still sat in the driveway, though it no longer symbolized vindication. Instead, it stood as a reminder of just how far they'd all come, from abandonment to abundance, from betrayal to blended family, from broken trust to beautiful beginnings. "Happy birthday, my loves," Carolina whispered as her daughters gathered around her for one final group hug of the day. "Best birthday ever," they declared in perfect harmony. And for the first time in 6 years, everyone who truly mattered was exactly where they belonged. Sometimes the most extraordinary families aren't the ones that start perfectly. They're the ones that choose each other along the way. Thank you for staying with me through this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful, inspiring, and unforgettable than you can imagine. Don't go anywhere. Click on the video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind.